We are very honored to be welcoming D.W. Hanneken, author of the debut novel, The Homefront. And he is going to be talking to Shannon Ishizaki from 1016/Orange Hat Publishing. Hanneken has written countless award-winning television commercials during his 25-year career in the ad business. This is his first novel. Ishizaki is the founder and owner of Orange Hat Publishing and 1016 Press. Please give them a big virtual hand. I give you D.W. Hanneken and Shannon Ishizaki.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for hosting us, Boswell. We always love collaborating with you, our favorite indie bookstore in Milwaukee. As Daniel said, I'm the owner of Orange Hat Publishing, 1016 Press, and I had the pleasure of meeting David back in November. So it's been over a year that we've been working together, revising, editing, working on graphic design for the cover. And here we are today, finally in celebration of the debut novel, The Homefront. So I'm gonna let David speak, and then I'm gonna be interviewing him with some different questions. And at the end, you'll be able to type into the chat button. And if you hover over the bottom middle, this little chat bubble will pop up. And at that point, you'll be able to type in. And David will be able to see your questions, and then he can respond at the end for the last 10 minutes. Yeah. So David, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about The Homefront. I know some people may have already read it already during the pre-order campaign, but can you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, yeah, some people have read it. Some people are probably tired of hearing about it because it's been, and I'll talk a little bit about this. It's been a little over a 10-year journey to get here, but my elevator speech goes like this. After her abusive husband leaves to fight in Europe in World War II, Maggie Wentworth struggles to find balance in her life and on her Wisconsin farm. Every day she's dealing with, the challenges of an aging father. She has a 4-year-old son. And then this German POW comes into her life and she has to deal with that temptation. So that's the elevator speech, but I can get into more detail here as we move forward.
David, tell us, so this fascinates me. How did you get interested into this time period in order to write a novel about it?
Well, it's interesting. I've always liked historical fiction, and but to be honest, it was primarily my mother who planted this idea in my head many, many years ago. As during the war, she worked in Camp Grant, which was a Army camp, U.S. Army camp outside of Rockford. And she used to talk about these German POWs. And I always thought, well, that's a strange thing. And, but I always thought it was always an idea in the back of my head. And it just sort of lived in the back of my head as this small little ember. And so nothing really happened with it until I want to say about 15 years ago. My wife and I were in Lake Geneva, and there was a small used bookstore. I think it's now a restaurant, probably closed and turned into something else. But there was this book in there called Stalag, Wisconsin that caught my eye. And as I just started flipping through it, I was like, oh my God, this is what my mother talked about. Here, I brought a copy. Here's a copy of it. It's probably out of print by now. But it's amazing because it was like, wow, this is the stuff she talked about. And the more I researched this, and I'll talk a little bit about research as the hour goes by, but I discovered there wasn't a lot written about this. And if I found out later that the US military, they wanted to keep it a secret for as long as they could. They wanted to, they were just trying to avoid any problems in and around the communities. But so anyway, I saw this book, I started flipping through these stories, and it's amazing, like the author interviewed American guards. She interviewed former German POWs, some who went back, well, they all had to go back, but some who ended up coming back. And so the more you dive into it, the more you just I couldn't believe some of the things that that happened with these guys and the way that they were treated and the way they lived. And I mean, it was just an incredible thing. And they lived mostly in these tent cities, mostly rural communities. And so it just was always in the back of my head. So as soon as I started reading through this book, I was like, oh man, I have enough information here to sort of bake this cake, you know?
Yeah. Well, I love the history, because you're also learning about, anyone I ask, tell them about this book, they're like, I never knew there was German prisoners of war here. And so I love talking further about this book with them. I wrote down some themes throughout the book. So as I was reading your book, I was thinking, did he come up with these? Like, which came first? Was it like, I really want to focus on these timeless themes that are really relevant today, or did they just come up during the creative writing process? So for example, there's themes of alcohol abuse and racism, domestic violence, homophobia, the challenges of broken home, and fascism. So all of these themes pop up throughout your book. So how did that come to be? Was it a conscious decision?
I'd love to say it was, but it really wasn't. In many ways, it's just sort of happened organically. I mean, I had the structure of the story. I needed to have readers feel sympathy for the main character, Maggie. So, one way to do that, of course, is to just make her husband a complete jerk. But as I started to build this story and you start to look at, the structure of good storytelling, you need to have, it's got to be relatable, right? You need relatable characters. You need conflict, of course. There's plenty of that in this book. And you need resolution, and, God forbid you learn something along the way. But, this book really sort of, like I said, I started with the story. I had the idea, and it really was, it's really not rocket science here. It's a tale as old as time, the idea of forbidden love. But then as I started to write it and I started to introduce new characters, I saw new opportunities for some pretty interesting conflict, and not that this is, not that it's intended to be some sort of, a lesson of any sort, but you start to, I think you learn a little bit, not just about the characters, you want to learn about them, but you learn a little bit about yourself. And this day and age, we're learning a lot about, the importance of inclusion and keeping, sadly, the world's going like this and we need to go this way. And I think some of this stuff hopefully helps people reflect a little bit and think about those things. But in essence, the short answer is, and I've always described this book as, it was kind of like driving in the fog. I've always said, as long as I can see 30 feet in front of the car, I can go from New York to LA. That's easy. Well, you got to go slow. And I certainly went slow. But what happened is, as I started introducing new characters, I started to go, oh, wow. So as I'm reading about migrant workers at this time in 1944, there were migrant workers in addition to the German POWs who worked in fields. And I found out a lot of them in Wisconsin were Jamaican. So I started to dive into what was it like to be a migrant worker in the 40s. So I had a lot of starts and stops along the way because I wanted to learn about those things and be able to talk about them, but ultimately to me, and this is, I guess, a theme, if I could reverse engineer it, I would say this is, on the surface, you say, yeah, this is a love story between two primary characters. But in reality, I think it's really it's a story about love, as far as showing the importance of how we all have to love each other now more than ever. And I think that's pretty obvious in here.
Yeah. So I have an important question, because this has come up. There's German soldiers and there's Nazis. Some people maybe not. Can you talk to me about the difference between those two titles and how it plays throughout your book and how it made your characters who they are?
You know, the heavy sigh you just heard, it's just really sad 75 years later that this is a topic, right? But it's an important question. And I think for people who don't know, and you can research this, it's not just my opinion. Yeah, I mean, German soldiers weren't all Nazis, right? The Nazi party was a ruling party at the time. And, but you know, it's in many ways, it's sort of like saying, well, if there's a Republican in the White House, then the military, they're all Republicans. And if there's a Democrat in the White House, everyone's Democrats. They're not. I think when you consider the role Hollywood has played to sort of foster that stereotype, which, you know, they make for really good bad guys in films and stuff. They weren't all Nazis. And as part of the research for this book, you know, and I mentioned this earlier, one of the things that I discovered is, you know, I found interviews with Germans, I found interviews with American guards, and there was a huge effort among the entire program to weed out the bad eggs because they knew that there could potentially be somebody riling up a group of soldiers in a camp. So, you know, they looked for people who may have been in the SS. They looked for people who were part of, you know, sympathizers with Hitler and the Nazi party and so on. And sometimes they were good at it, but sometimes people slipped through the cracks. And I'm going to do my best to not spoil much in this interview tonight. But yeah, I mean, there's one in particular who slips through the cracks, and that's all I'll tell you. But he's a troublemaker, and he's in the book. But also there's other examples of how, you know, just because you were a German, or just because a German soldier, or just because you were a German immigrant, which I call them the first family. My first family in the story, the Muellers, they came here. They're immigrants from Germany. They came here to escape authoritarian rule. And they make it known very often throughout the book. They're not fans of Hitler. There are instances where a lot of the Germans make it clear that they're not fans. Now, I don't also want to just broad brush over it because, you know, if you're in the German military, you were following orders and all the rest of that stuff. So, you know, Hitler was the leader, the 30s and the 40s. You had to swear allegiance to him and all the rest of it. And there were atrocities. It was war, you know. But I think when you read the book, you'll see people will find out that, you know, it really is exposing bigotry and hatred for the stain that it really is.
But there's certain aspects within your book. Are all of those accurate, where the soldiers were, the German prisoners of war were here in Wisconsin, but were they paid? Like, were they really part of the community and able to go out and shop and be with people?
So it's fascinating, really, when you, yes, I'll answer that question first. People find it hard to believe that they were paid. They were paid in scrip that had value. They could buy things, and like there was a little store in a lot of the camps. They ate what the guards ate. They even, for, you know, closer to the end of the war, they could even leave and go into town. They could buy ice cream. They could sometimes, some of them were found, there's stories of some German POWs in bars. And the reason it all happened was what was going on in North Africa and Italy. I don't want to bore everybody with this history lesson, but it's interesting to know. So the British are making all these gains. They're capturing a lot of German POWs, and he's running out of places to put them. At the same time, we have Roosevelt sending these supply ships over to support the effort. And Churchill asked Roosevelt if we would take the POWs to the United States, because the ships were going back to the US empty. And so he said yes, and it was a win-win for both sides because there were massive labor shortages because people, you got to remember too, we were fighting Japan at this time. So a lot of people signed up for the military and they went to fight the Japanese. And that meant there were a lot of, I mean, it wasn't just on farms. I mean, there were farms, there were crops just rotting in fields because there was no one there to harvest them. These guys worked in lumber yards, road crews, canneries. In Wisconsin, a lot of canneries. They worked in canneries and so on. But it's remarkable the way they were treated. And part of it was by design because the Americans didn't want trouble. They didn't want them to escape. And frankly, when you think about it, where are they going to go? You know, so if you're fed 3 square meals a day and you're treated quite well and you paid, some of these guys went back to Germany after the war with money in their pockets. I mean, it's just unheard of, you know.
Well, I think that also holds true to what you were saying. Your theme of your book is love. It's the human, we're all human to our core. So, you know, the humility of it, of it all. Tell me more about your research, because you're clearly a history buff or have a very, high interest in history, but what other types, how did you research all of this?
All right, well, I mean, I mentioned that book, right? But honestly, there were 3 big firsthand influences for me, maybe even, I'll go, yeah, let's say 4. One was my mother, as I mentioned before, you know, she worked in this camp. My father, though, he grew up on a farm in Southern Illinois from, mid-20s to mid-40s. So he was an amazing resource. I mean, he shared with me, he talked about farming practices like planting and harvesting and, how they did things on the farm at that time. And it's certainly not the same as it is today. It's very, very different. He also talked about, what the days were like, what were winters like on the farm. He talked a lot about the mischief that he got into with his brothers. And a lot of those stories found their way in here. I'll answer which ones later if somebody wants to ask me, did this happen to your dad? But also like my mother was great. She scrubbed this thing for me twice. And, she found all these little things like, when you write historical fiction, you want to get it right as best you can. I know I got it wrong in many instances, but like I had a scene where she's smoking a Viceroy and she was like, Viceroy, I never smoked Viceroy. That was a guy's cigarette. We smoked Chesterfields, things like that she talked about. Not to give away too much, but there's a reference to Frank Sinatra in here. And what's really interesting is before this call, my sister Joan sent me a text to remind me that my mother got to see Frank Sinatra's very, very first concert with Tommy Dorsey in a theater in Rockford. And it was 81 years ago tonight.
What?
Yeah, which was
That's
really
incredible.
There's also things that happen. Again, I don't want to, can't tell you that. No. There's a handful of things I want to tell you, but I can't. But my uncle, my mother's brother, my Uncle Danny, was what you would call a country doctor back in the day. Even though he was an anesthesiologist, he delivered babies, he set broken bones, you did everything back in those days. And he was a phenomenal resource for me because, he would tend to injuries on the farm and injuries out and about and all those things. And then I think also, I grew up in a house with 5 women, and I've had people say like, your perspective, this is from the point of view, primarily, your protagonist is a woman. And so I did a lot of, I let a lot of them read it. I got some phenomenal notes from them and other friends of mine. And it's no secret that, read this on the back of the book, but, Maggie's abused by this husband who's such a jerk. you know, and I've had people tell me who have read it, and they've said, you know, Dave, this is, you know, the way she's reacting in this scene isn't accurate, and the way she's doing, you know, and so I was really open. I was like, you guys got to tell me, and I got some phenomenal notes from that experience too. Needless to say, I had a lot of beta readers.
Yeah, that was all part of this whole last year, this process of changing and revising.
Right.
And,
oh my gosh,
yeah,
it was very helpful, of course, because
so
you want to get it right. You know, you want to get it right.
Well, absolutely, yeah. So tell me more about the symbolism in the book.
Oh yeah,
Was that a lot of it intentional, or?
Yeah, some of it is. I mean, I'm self-editing here because things happen that
You had, well, Adam, the name Adam.
okay, yeah, Adam's a good one. Adam's easy.
Yeah.
So Adam was one of 6 German POWs who's picking apples in her orchard. So she has 2 crops primarily. She has apples and she has oats. The Jamaicans are working in the oat field and the Germans are working in the apple orchard. So you have here's a character who's very tempting. He works in the apple.
Of course, his name's Adam.
His name had to be Adam. I'm sorry, it just did. I wouldn't go so far as to call Maggie Eve because that would be over.
Yeah.
But you know, there is a lot of little things that happen in here. My dear friend Lorette Perlowitz helped design this cover, and there's, you know, even the window above the barn, you know, you can see the window of the barn. So that's like the some people call that, I don't believe this is accurate, but a lot of people call it the Iron Cross. This was on a lot of German military equipment. It was, and on uniforms. It was on the Luftwaffe, all their planes and tanks and so on. So there's a little Easter egg in there, and there's a lot of other Easter eggs throughout the book. But
nice.
I just like baking those into stories, you know.
Right, for sure. So what do you think was the hardest part of writing this book?
Clear, it was you know, trying to get it right and trying to do the research. And like I said, a lot of stop and starts. And as I said before, driving in the fog, I knew where I wanted to go, you know, but as you're going on this journey, you'd be like, oh, what's that over there? I got to get off the road and go explore that. And then you get back on the freeway and drive some more, and you're making some progress. And, you know, another character comes in, and then there's just a lot of conflict, a lot of twists and turns that happen. And I just wanted to make sure I got that right. But I would say technically I probably started it 12 years, maybe 12 years ago. And then over time, and it was a hobby. I mean, I got a full-time job and it's hard, and you got young kids in the house. So you just, you know, you work on it when you can work on it. And, but it was my hobby. Some people like to woodwork, you know, this was my hobby. So,
but what was the advice that you told me before that someone gave you? I love that advice that they told you.
So when I finally finished the book, I want to say it was probably 4 years in, or since I started. And I had a friend say to me, you wrote a book, congratulations. Now here's my advice. Put it in a drawer and start your second book. So I did. It seriously, it hibernated for a few years, and I did write another book. And then I put that one in a drawer and that's still in a drawer, but then I took this one out. And what's really interesting is, you know, I forget who said it, but you know, the key to writing is rewriting. And
yeah.
So when I took this book back out and looked at it with fresh eyes, and we all know, anyone who's taking, like even taking an English class, you know, you have to write a theme paper, and you know, they always say, make sure you write it if you can, and nobody does this, but on occasion I did it. You'd finish it a few days early, and then you look at it and you just find these glaring mistakes. Well, the same thing happened with me. The analogy I use, it's like, you know, in those crime shows where the guy puts the blue light, you know, comes to the crime scene, it looks perfect. And they come and they shine a blue light in there, and they see all the, you know, the crime scene's a mess. There's blood everywhere, but you can't see it, but you see it with the blue light.
Yeah.
And so I put a blue light on this book, and it was just, I took chapters out, I moved chapters around, I did a lot. I did a lot, and I'm really thankful for that advice, because I think it made it a much better book. So I'm super happy with the way it turned out, you know.
So what is the second book that you've been working on then?
I don't know why I'm a sucker for historical fiction, but it's a book. It doesn't take place in the 40s. It takes place in the mid 70s in the Washington Heights neighborhood of Milwaukee. And it's probably more a young adult. It's about a young man who's trying to keep his grandfather's legacy alive. I guess, you know, everything's a love story, right? It's a love story.
You're romantic, David.
It's the love this young man has for his grandfather. And it's a weird one, and maybe that's our next call, but it's a story that came to me in a dream. The whole thing came to me in a dream. Start, middle, all 3 acts, everything. And I woke up and I told my wife, I said, I got a new book I have to write. And so I did that, and that one's sitting in the drawer right now too. So,
so it's done. It's ready for reader reviews then. So we might have some volunteers tonight.
I have to put the blue light on that one too, and I have a feeling it's gonna be a crime scene as well.
So okay, so the fun, juicy background about tell me about how this could be, how someone read it, and what did they say? Like, this, I could totally see this as a screenplay. But then there was some backstory about that too, how it could have been or could be.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I have a good friend who read it, and he said, you know, this really does flow nicely. And he said, you should, and he's a screenwriter in Los Angeles, and he said, you should consider writing this as a screenplay, an adaptation. And I was like, oh God, okay, well, I don't know how to do a screenplay. I write scripts all the time for 30-second TV commercials. I've never done it before. So he held my hand, and we went through the process, and I got a 400 in a Word document. It was 475 pages, you know. And I remember calling him going, good news, I got it down to 200 pages. He says, no, it's got to be 120. I was like, okay. So I called him back. Great news, I got it to 150. Great news, he's like, no. I finally got it to 120. And I fully expected him to say, good job, send it to me, I'll give it to my agent.
Right, yeah.
Alan, if you're listening, I'm talking about you. And he said, my agent only does comedies. I said, I can't take this book. And I said, well, or this screenplay. So I was like, well, what do I do? And he said, you enter it in festivals. So I entered it in a festival, a handful of them. But it was a quarterfinalist in one, which I find interesting. I entered it in the British Independent Film Festival, and it was a quarterfinalist. And it just sort of sparked this idea in my head going like, you know, I think there might be an audience in Europe for this. But anyway,
absolutely.
So, I mean, you know, it's probably that stuff. That's way over here, but it is nice, and it's you know, humbling and fun to have somebody. Okay,
well then
a good story, you know.
So then, who would play Maggie?
Oh God, I have to answer this, don't I? Because I'd be lying to you if I said I don't know.
Or the different characters, and I want to be a background, just like
I love
trees in the farm.
You ever watch the show Shameless?
No.
So Emmy Rossum is one of the lead characters in there. I think she'd be a good Maggie. And there's probably people on this call who've read the book and they're like, "You're nuts." No.
What? No, I think she'd be perfect.
I always had trouble. I can't. Adam, the German POW, he's a mystery to me. I can't.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've got a friend of mine suggested recently, like maybe James Franco or Jake Gyllenhaal. Eric, the jerk husband, certainly Shia LaBeouf would be good for him. Big Jack, who is Maggie's dad. I always sort of saw Robert Duvall in my head, but he's probably a little too old now for that.
Okay, a younger Robert.
Yeah, maybe a younger Robert Duvall, whoever that would be. Maybe Sam Elliott would be good. And then
the kid, Benny.
Oh, Benny, God, if I could find a clone for that little boy who was in Jerry Maguire, that kid is perfect.
Yeah.
And well, Oku, the Jamaican, the head of the Jamaican migrants, he's another mystery. You know, Courtney B. Vance, I always thought would be great. I don't know if Courtney would want to do the Jamaican accent, but
right.
Courtney's just a great actor. And
I remember when we were talking about this launch, and we were talking about if you should do a reading from the book or whatever, and I said, so can you imitate the Jamaican accent? Like, should we pick a part that doesn't have that? Because that would be very difficult. And was that difficult in the editing process? Did you have to or the writing process, did you have to say it out loud to see if it was written Jamaican?
Kind of. I mean, in advertising, you kind of do that too. If I'm writing a script for a certain character, you kind of have to do that. I think that I do read a lot out loud when I'm writing, and I think it helps because it's one thing when you hear it in your head, but it's another thing if it comes out of your mouth and then goes back in and you go, oh, that sounds awful and that sounds terrible.
Yeah.
So, but I've had some people say, why did you do that? So for those who don't know, I wrote Oku. His lines in the book read phonetically. It's not over the top. It's just once in a while I'll pepper in some words just to help. I think again, because characters, you want to give your characters some differentiation between one another. There's nothing worse than reading a book and the character appears and you're like, well, wait, who's that? Wait, and you got to come back, go in the back and find, oh, that's the guy with with no teeth or whatever. So I like to at least give some sort of physical trait to somebody. And I think it just helped with Oku's. And he's one of my favorite characters in the book.
Yeah,
I've had a lot
I think that's something you did very well with each character, no matter how minor their role is. I still wanted to know about them, and so it gave us a little insight of this person's life and this person's life, and then we come back to them. So I think you did that really well. I see a lot of your fans have some questions that are popping up, so I didn't know if you wanted to answer some of those. I think people are interested in your relationship with your current career as a commercial ad writer, and I don't know if you can read them.
I'm not used to Zoom so much. Let me find it here. More, probably under more, huh?
Are you able to read some?
In the chat. Yeah, here we go. So I'll answer you the question you just asked regarding the advertising business. And, I have found that it really helped me writing this book. I mean, again, it's for some people who are real purists, they're just like, oh, don't compare advertising to writing a novel. And I never pretend to be. I mean, I'm not, my prose, you can't surf on my prose like it's Jane Austen or Sue Monk Kidd or somebody. But what they have in common is, you have conflict, you have resolution. And this is not true of every TV commercial, let's be honest. I mean, not all of them allow for basic tenets of conflict and resolution. Sometimes you have to do an ad for Steinhoffel's store-wide mattress sale, It's retail, you just got to get the word out about it. Yeah. But there are times where, I I have been lucky enough to be able to set up a problem and have it solved in a fun, unique way, whether it's a penguin escaping from the zoo or a Apollo astronaut who never got his chance to go to the moon, or if you get, if you have the budget to hire Charles Barkley or Jerry Seinfeld to give some celebrity credence to your product or your service, but still understanding the basic tenets of good storytelling and good friction, you'll find them in good advertising. So for me, I think what's really helped me, if I could pick one thing, it's really been dialogue and efficiencies in the dialogue, because, and for 20 some years, you end up, if I have to say a lot in 30 seconds. I'm always constrained to 30 seconds if there is dialogue in a spot. So I think that is in the book, and I've had a few people say, like, what I really like is the pacing of your dialogue is really good. And I think that's probably because of the many years in the ad business,
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's, again, I don't want to compare,
Right.
what I'm doing here to things that people toil over for, I almost said 10 years, and I was one of, right? No, but I haven't worked 10 years on a 30-second TV spot either. But I do feel like you pick up a lot, and I think it shows in the dialogue. So
yeah, did you want to transfer over to the Q&A section? Think
Yeah,
other questions are
we
popping up, or?
Yeah, we could do that. Let me just sort of scroll through some of these. Oh boy, how's my experience writing comedy and humor-based ads helped me on this journey? Jim Steiner. I think there's some humor in the book, but again, I think it's still related to pacing and compression and economies of getting your point across quickly.
Sorry, I was chuckling at Ross's. Why are you so cool?
Oh,
You obviously have some fun friends here.
I don't know that guy. No, I'm kidding. I sent $10 before this.
I think, well, I don't want to dictate what you're answering, but one question that I liked was, did you have the story developed? Oh, okay. That's another one. Like, did you already have the start and end complete? You had the bones of the story done, right? And then you added in?
A great question. Actually, no.
Oh, really?
So this book, the second book, like I said, that was all given to me and here. This book, I really debated about, the ending.
Oh.
Is it a happy ending? Is it a sad ending? Do I put in that scene from Bridges from Madison County? Does she open the door, he's right in front of you, or do I make it a happy ending? And I don't know. So I wasn't sure what to do. And I remember having lunch with a good friend of mine, and I was talking about this. I said, I'm really struggling. I'm maybe a third of the way through, but I don't have the ending. And it really bothered me that I didn't have the ending. I had possible endings, but I really wanted one that just bang, just like, this is it. And she said to me, just keep writing, it'll come to you. And she was right. So I kept going, and it just, again, it was driving in the fog, right? Are you tired of that analogy? It just, there it appeared one day. I was just driving like, oh, there it is. I arrived. I'm in LA. But there's another question. Which was my favorite character to develop and why?
Yeah.
Kim and Eric Johnson. It's so hard. It's like picking your favorite kid. I saw a great interview with Neil Gaiman, and he was talking about the beautiful thing about writing fiction is you get to play God. And I was like, God, I've always said that. Because I create these people that don't exist, but right up here, and I can I can kill them off. I can do all these things. I can introduce them to other people. I can force them to fight. I can do all these things. And that's what's so beautiful about and fun about writing fiction. But the favorite character, God, Kim, is probably your question. I don't know. I do love Oku, and maybe it just is obvious in the writing, but I love Oku. I love Big Jack too. Big Jack has a lot of my dad. He reminds me a lot of my dad, and a lot of his wit and wisdom is.
Did your dad have a nickname like something like that?
No, he didn't. No.
You just came up to that.
His name was Clem, which is in some circles a nickname, but it's not a common name, Clemens. But you know, he also had a phenomenal sense of humor. So there is. I wanted to make that. I had to put some funny things in this book. And I love the relationship between he and Benny, the 4-year-old. You know, Benny's the son that Big Jack never had. He's his grandfather, right? And I just love their relationship. And Big Jack, even though he's, you know, like 70 or something and not in the greatest of health, he becomes a child, and he's the kid. Benny awakens the kid in him, you know?
Yeah. Did your dad appreciate the subtle similarities between him and Big Jack?
You know, it's interesting. My dad wasn't a big reader, so we lost him. He passed away last month. But I was able to show him a printed book, and said he was a mathematician, and it was very funny. I'm like, Dad, look, I got my book done. And he said, you wrote a book? I said, yeah. He said, I wrote a book. And he turned around and he reached over on the bookcase, and there was a book on mathematics, like advanced calculus or something.
Oh.
And then he wanted to read it to me, just like, it was so funny. It was like it was a piece of fiction. And he's reading
numbers and
yeah, like, how would you solve this, Dave? How would you solve that? And I'm like, Dad, I went into advertising because I didn't know how to do that math stuff. Anyway,
interesting.
Yeah. So, boy, yeah, there's a lot of.
Well, I want to tell your fans that we actually sold out of all of the pre-order first print run books from our office today. So, but I also know that Daniel at Boswell has copies, signed copies by David. So if you're looking to purchase his book, I would go to the Boswell website and order it there. And then we're gonna order more, so we can always get more here in-house as well. But yeah, it's been a pleasure, David. It's been so wonderful working with you. And I don't know if you wanted to answer any more questions or
I did want to answer. I see one here from Sue Leister. Sue asked about, and this dovetails off of what I was just talking about. You know, there's this, again, I don't want to give anything away, but there's some practical jokes that happen in the book. Those came straight from my father. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of them did, but again, I don't know. I think it's important to infuse some humor in serious subjects, you know.
Oh yeah.
And you kind of write what you like, you know. I like books that'll do that. That'll be, if it's, no matter how heavy it is, and you set it up front, Shannon. I mean, we're talking about some very serious problems in society today, and they were very problematic in the 40s as well. And hopefully by exposing them and talking about them, and, you know, I think it was even harder back in the 40s for people to, you know, and I've talked to my mom about this at length, a lot of people just internalized a lot. There were a therapist was, you know, that was maybe somebody who helped you, like a physical therapist. And, you know, so it was hard for people to talk. Certainly we know the men who came back from the war well, men and women, let's be fair. But majority of them guys, like we all talk about our grandfathers or, you know, never talked about the war, came home from the war, never talked about the war. I mean, these guys lived with that. They didn't, PTSD, they didn't know what that was. So it was really a tough time in a lot of ways, but even harder for people who had these emotional issues that they were dealing with, or this pain they had to get out, and they just couldn't. Who do you turn to? You know, it was just our culture and our society. It just wasn't something that we were real comfortable with, you know. And that's actually another reason I introduced this. So Maggie, she lived on a farm with her father. Her husband was gone. She has a 4-year-old son. She needed somebody to confide in. She didn't have any siblings. So that's where Audrey came from. And Audrey, as I started to write that character, I started to notice, you know, she complements so many things. They're very yin yang. The things that Maggie struggles with, Audrey, you know, really, they basically became like sisters. And but you know, there was a point where they just didn't really talk though about a lot. And I think that was really inherent of just those times and the way people lived and communicated, you know. You asked about anything else I'm writing. I'm going to start, I really want to start writing some short stories. And I have a website that I probably just put them up there when I get them, but I don't know. I want to focus on this first, and then short stories are going to be, you know.
I feel like this would be a really good book for book clubs. Is that type of thing interest you, for you to be a guest author at a book club?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Absolutely. I love talking about it. You can tell. Can you tell? I do. And it's like, if anybody wants more background, you know, the beauty of the book club is everybody will, by the time if I'm invited, you have read it, and then I can share a lot of the reasons why.
Right.
It's a little
The
tricky.
symbolism.
I want to be respectful of a lot of the people who are on this call and not give away too much, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, it was just one of these, it was a passion project for me for years. And like I said up front, there are a lot of people, a lot of good friends of mine who were just like, would you please stop talking about it and publish this thing already?
Is it Ross that says you're so cool? I think he said it twice. And then Steve is asking why DW? Is W your middle initial?
Yeah, William. Yeah. Yeah. And I needed a little separation between, you know, church and state with my professional ad guy.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I think,
well, I mean, maybe
reason.
You're getting your name out there, because I mean, we got a stellar Kirkus review back, so that was really nice. And then NetGalley reviews are coming in. We had someone on Saturday that wrote from England.
Another London, England. That's interesting.
Great reviews. So that will help spread the word. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone. This has been so interesting, Dave, and I'm so excited for more people to read it. And if you've read it, rate reviews. That helps. Daniel, did you want to?
I wanted to thank you both. Shannon, great job. Thank you to everyone who attended tonight. We wouldn't have a bookstore without you. Continued success. You've already heard everybody who has a book club should invite Dave to their book